The words of Jesus aren't always warm and fuzzy, are they? That was a little uncomfortable passage of Scripture. Well, I want to start this morning by sharing with you that I've been blessed in my life. I've been very privileged, and not in a bad way, in a good way, in a way that gives me some perspective on the world that I otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to have. Now, I was born in Utah, and that's a place where diversity is essentially defined by how much time someone spent outside with a bottle of suntan lotion. Now, of course, there is more diversity in Utah now, but it's not exactly the most diverse place in the country. And when I was very young, Utah was not known for its diverse population. So imagine my surprise when, as a young child, I moved to a border town in Southern California. Most of my friends either lived in Mexico. What is that? A voice from above. Anyhow, most of my friends either lived in Mexico or had parents from Mexico. They were second-generation U.S. residents. And I was one of only a handful of white kids in my entire school. So I gained some perspective on what it might be like to speak a different language. I lived as a minority. I learned what it was like to be the one who was different. And after I got married for the first time, I actually lived in Mexico. And I learned what it was like to live in a different country. I learned what it was like for people who wished to cross the border into the United States. Now, Mexico is pretty relaxed about who can enter, but the U.S. is much more strict about who can come back. Now, I could cross back and forth at will, and sometimes I did to go to work. I crossed the border every day with my American passport. But many of my friends and my in-laws who lived in Mexico could go to the border fence, but no further. My world was open, and their world was closed. So keep in mind, my ability to come and go as I pleased was not because of anything I had done for myself. I was fortunate enough to have been born in the United States, and because of that, I have always been and always will be a U.S. citizen. I didn't do anything to deserve American citizenship. However, during that time in my life, I certainly learned what a privilege it can be. I learned that the immigration process to enter the United States is broken. Foreign residents seeking green cards must wait in hours-long lines to get the paperwork they'll have to fill out. And then they need to fill out the paperwork with little or no guidance. And then they have to wait in hours-long lines to submit the paperwork. And if it's wrong, then they have to go back and start all over again. And even when it is correct, the agents still kind of yell at people and speak condescendingly to them. And people have to come up with upwards of 50,000 American dollars in cash before they can even start the process. Coming to the United States the right way is expensive. It's emotionally draining, and in some cases, it's downright inhumane. I learned to have more compassion for my sisters and brothers who were born in other parts of the world. In fact, the fact that they were born on a different side of an imaginary line was the only reason they had to jump through a bunch of hoops to do something that I could simply take for granted. It was a real eye-opener for me. Now, later in life, I had the opportunity to study in Berkeley, California. The seminary I attended, the Church Divinity School of the Pacific, is linked to the University of California. And UC Berkeley is one of the top higher learning institutions in the world. And it also happens to be located in what would become the de facto headquarters for fundamentalist liberal philosophy. Now, Berkeley, part of the San Francisco Bay Area, is a place ripe with diverse populations of people. People of color, people from other countries and other parts of the world, people who speak about every language known to humanity, people of varied gender identities and sexual orientations, people who are uber rich and people who are poorer than poor, people who live in beautiful mansions overlooking the San Francisco Bay, and people who assemble cardboard boxes every night to provide enough shelter to set up their sleeping bags to sleep on the sidewalks. I didn't have a whole lot of money when I lived in Berkeley, but I by no means was the poorest person around, not even close. These types of opportunities gave me chances to interact with people I never otherwise would have engaged with. Before I moved to Berkeley, I didn't know many LGBTQ plus people. In fact, I didn't even know what it meant for someone to be transgender. In my naivete, I thought that was something people did in Thailand to entertain tourists or something like that. By sitting down and having conversations with trans people who were gracious and kind and courteous and even appreciative that I was willing to ask questions instead of making assumptions, I was able to receive their stories and to understand that something deeper was going on with them. Something I did not experience myself, but something that was not any less real because of that. While I do not personally understand what it means to identify as something other than what I am, I learned that trans people have real and genuine experiences that I don't have to understand. And my ability to understand exactly what they are going through does not mean their experiences are any less real. I learned to have deeper compassion for the LGBTQ plus community. Their struggle became more real, more tangible. Just because I didn't share it, it didn't mean someone else didn't. And I also learned more compassion for people who were living on the streets. Sometimes their struggle was because they became injured and were no longer able to work. Sometimes they ran away from home to escape toxic family situations. Sometimes they faced mental illness and were not treated with dignity and respect when they sought treatment. Other times, the treatments for their conditions were too expensive for them to manage. When the question about a shelter was asked, oftentimes people said they felt safer on the streets. Shelters are sometimes filthier than the streets. Sometimes families are separated in shelters. If it's a men's shelter, the men must leave their wives if they wish to enter. And sometimes their children are separated from them. Sometimes they must give up everything they own if they wish to stay in a shelter. Now, shelters indeed can be a good use of resources, but they don't work for everyone. While there are certainly homeless people who are homeless as consequences of their own actions, there are also countless others who are homeless because they could never get a leg up in the world. And our American way of thinking tells us that we should pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and make a life for ourselves. And we hear that a lot. I worked hard every day for everything I ever had. And to be fair, it's true. People who have a lot often do work quite hard to get what they have. I worked very hard to get my education and to learn how to be a priest. But my life experiences have shown me that my working hard to succeed was tremendously aided by my U.S. citizenship that I did not earn. It was aided by my good fortune of good health and lack of injuries all my life. It was a stable home life. It was attending private school. It was being in the right place at the right time. In fact, it was because of these intangibles that I was able to have the life experiences that I've had. Why else would I have gone to visit an INS office? Why else would I have gone to the Bay Area and interacted with LGBTQ plus people or homeless people or people from other countries? In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have. I'm tremendously privileged to live the life I live, and my privilege has given me perspective I otherwise simply would not have had. Now, in our gospel reading today, Jesus has compassion on the crowds because they are harassed and helpless. They were like sheep without a shepherd. And he tells his disciples to do the same. Now, the Greek word that Jesus uses for scattered and helpless is irimenoi, and it means cast aside. The people to whom Jesus ministered were cast aside, neglected, forgotten about. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. He then sent the laborers out into the harvest. To his disciples, in Greek, methete, followers, learners, students. He told them to go and to do. Well, guess what? We are his followers. We are his disciples. We are his mathete. And we are called to go and to do. We are the laborers. And this is a big harvest. There are few laborers for all the work that needs to be done. But we are called to have compassion on those who need our help. Now, as a church, this means we have to discern how we want to labor. We already know we want to follow Jesus' call, so that part is easy. But the difficult piece is figuring out how best to be the laborers. And part of that is with our stewardship. It's not exactly inexpensive to keep this place running, and our parishioners are our source of income. Your pledges, our pledges, that's where the funding comes from. And part of that means ensuring there's funding for building upkeep. If you look down at the floor, then you'll notice that our carpet is ready to be replaced. That costs money. If you've wandered through the parking lot and you've noticed that the asphalt is crumbling under your feet, then you know that that needs to be replaced. And that costs money. A fresh coat of paint on the walls inside and outside, that costs money. But they show the world that we care. This is your church. This is home base for our shared labor. A clean, tidy building is appealing, and it draws in more laborers. More laborers who want to be fed and then do some feeding of their own. It grows the church, and it helps our resources to grow exponentially. Our stewardship drives the mission of this church and enables us to do the work God is calling us to do. That's why we place the collection plate on the altar during communion. We are consecrating all the gifts, not just the bread and the wine, but all the gifts for the betterment of the world. Now, as a side note, if you have a special gift you'd like to offer for those specific causes, get in touch with the office. It's perfectly appropriate to offer special gifts to designated causes like building upkeep. Our discernment as disciples, as mathete, doesn't end there. No, this is our home base, and we must take care of it. And by the way, thank you for taking care of it. But it also means we as a community get to discern what we want to do to be the church in the world. Sadly, the homeless population in our community is growing. Think about it. If you were homeless somewhere else, wouldn't you try to make your way south to where you won't have to worry about dying from freezing? Many homeless people make their way towards cities and towns in the Sun Belt, of which Greater Phoenix is a part. And what do we do to ensure that these people are treated with dignity and respect? Now, from what I understand, there had been a history of allowing people to shower in our bathroom facilities. There also continues to be a history of offering food and even clothing through the food pantry. But what do we do when someone enters our property and sits on our benches or sits under our trees? That's not up to me. That's up to us as a community. And it's something we need to discern as a community. On a number of occasions, I've spoken with Bishop Jennifer about this. And my frustrations are that people come on our property and they damage our campus. Sometimes we find litter. We find evidence of drug use. Our water faucets have been broken a number of times. Our air conditioning units have been damaged, most likely to steal copper or other metals for recycling. And Bishop Jennifer explained to me that she had a congregation in New York City. And in New York, she said her parish welcomed homeless people to sleep on the parish steps. There was an understanding that they'd be gone in the morning. But there was also an added layer of protection. You see, if the homeless people were cared for, then they would protect the property in return. And maybe that's a romanticized idea, but I think it makes sense. It sounds something like this. Hey, don't do that here. These people are good people, and they take care of us. And if you want to go damage something, go damage it somewhere else. Now, I don't know the answer. I don't think it's anything goes, but I do know that we are called to compassion. And compassion, the word compassion, by the way, comes from Latin. And if we break it down, it means with and suffer. Compassion. To suffer with. To allow ourselves to feel empathy. To feel what the other person might be feeling. And in fairness, we can't do everything. Jesus does remind us that the poor will be with us always. We're never going to eliminate poverty, but we can do something. And again, it's not up to me. It's up to us. How do we treat our unhoused neighbors, our foreign-born neighbors, our LGBTQ plus neighbors, and in fact, all of our neighbors with love, compassion, and dignity? If someone rejects our compassion, then we dust our feet off and we try again. But we don't give up trying to offer it. Now here's where it becomes personal, where we put the rubber to the road. We're looking for parishioners to volunteer to be on a task force to help to discern on behalf of the parish what this labor of love looks like. Now, St. John's is already doing a lot of good. We feed the hungry. We clothe the naked. We give rest to the weary. But that doesn't mean our work is complete. Our work is never complete. Now, if you're feeling called to be on this task force or involved in a similar ministry, please reach out to me and let me know. This is our work to do together. As a parish, those are a few of the tasks that we have at the moment. How do we remain mindful of our stewardship so that we can continue to operate a clean, well-maintained, beautiful, attractive campus? And how do we demonstrate compassion to our neighbors whom we might not fully understand? It's tough work. No one said it was easy. In fact, Jesus said it's like lambs being led off to the wolves. But this is the kind of work that brings us closer to understanding what it means to be the kingdom of God. When we are his followers, when we are his methete, when we give of ourselves, we become such fuller versions of ourselves. Sometimes it hurts in the moment, but our reward will be great in heaven. St. John's, continue to be the church in the world.